Hello. And there we go. I have pictures, I guess. Welcome back, everybody. I am here again with another chapter of my dad's manuscript, and it's called Plague Wizards. It's fairly self-explanatory, actually. It's a fantasy piece. Yep. I'm not sure if I'm actually. Oh, there we go. Bing. Good. Yesterday was a little bit problematic, so I'm hoping that today is better. Anyway, I'm currently on chapter 10 and 15, which means I'm 2/3 of the way through. And for those of you just tuning in, like I said, I'm 2/3 of the way through, so I would normally say go back but the video for the earlier episodes of this specific manuscript have some problems because I had some things I had to sort out with the audio, which means I'm gonna have to actually redo that. In the meantime, though, what I will be doing is I will be running some video over this coming up weekend to do the pickups on the chapters that I like were broken, and we'll go from there. But tonight it's chapter 10. I will also be doing editing while I'm going, so hence the markers. So if you see me pausing, it's because I'm editing, but I'll let you know because there'll be like eye rolling and things like that happening because that's what happens when I live edit. Okay, so here I go. Chapter 10. They spent a day where they were. Royan grudged even that day, but the fugitives from Pengua household did have to reorganize before setting out on the road. Their flight from the city had not gone unmarked, unfortunately. The mob's not a great worry, he told his magicians. They won't likely follow us out of the city. The army, well, that's another matter. I can't see the king getting them out after us until tomorrow. We've assigned people to watch the gate to let us know if they come closer, or if they come sooner. As for the rest of you, I've worked you too long and too hard as it is. From now on, we hope to be using a lot less magic. He could foresee, but he wasn't going to say it right now, that times would come down the road when they'd need as much magic as they could muster. And he had a lot of cantankerous elder recruits and quarter-trained baby wizards to call on. His drilled-in respect for grandmasters had frayed sufficiently that even he could think with very little cursed hangrel. He was just short of certain that the king would send an army after them. The king was going to have troubles enough in the next few days. On the other hand, the king and court were convinced that all the troubles were the fault of Pengua household, and that I might want to mete out punishment, just for the look of it, though that punishment would do nothing to halt the plagues. There were several towns along the way, and he also had to assume that word would come to those towns, and somewhere a city garrison might try to stop Pengua household, and they'd have to fight their way through. There were ways of sending messages other than by a man or on a fast ricasa. The only consolation was that very shortly the people of Gegapeng would have other things on their minds than sending messages. He clamped his teeth together. He just called a disastrous plague a consolation. He scowled. Yes, they'd be called bringers of the plague, and everyone would resist the households passing through their territory, no matter what assurances he tried to give. The irony was that he and his people were much less to spread the plague than were any other group that might come from Gegapeng. He walked through the camp, surveying the situation. In part, he wanted to let the people see that he was with them, sharing in their troubles. Unfortunately, that little bit of encouragement was all he could do. There was too little he could do in any material sense, and he couldn't respond to every request for help. He saw Allison sitting beside a campfire with young Solitang Malapis's child, apparently discussing that old wood grain inspection spell. What did you find so interesting about that. Probably just some word usage or other that was outside the ordinary. He didn't bother to talk to her, just gave them both a smile and a cheery wave. Tomorrow they'd have to be traveling. Malungtil was still alone, even on his second day, still too well known as the author of their troubles. He'd been bumped and pushed a time or two, but he suspected that word had come down that he was under the protection of the Grand Master, and no one should mistreat him. Otherwise he might have found himself the target of actual blows and kicks, if not a full-fledged beating. He was careful not to respond with magic, even the least calming spell, since to accentuate the fact that he was a wizard would only make the situation worse. The calming spell. That was another one of those anomalies of Saljashan, like the magical punishment for those suspected of using improper magic. The authorities in Saljashan still used the calming spell, one that controlled the behavior of people by magic, despite the fact that it was so close to the manner of operation of the Blue Wizard himself. He looked back from the jouncing cart and saw smoke rising from the far-off city. It was common, when plagues hit, for people to burn plague-stricken houses in hopes of lessening the risk of contagion. In most quarters of most cities, the straw-thatched houses were packed close together so that this practice risked setting the whole sections of the city afire, perhaps even the whole city, if too few able-bodied people were left to try to control the flames. "What are you staring at?" a belligerent voice demanded. "It's not your city." Malungtil remained quiet, knowing that anything he said in an attempt to placate the fellow would have just the opposite effect. He turned to face forward again. He turned back to face forward again. Ryan's own thoughts were about whether or not someone had set fire to Pengwa House itself. He'd been adopted into a Pengwa household, but at so early an age that most of his memories were of Pengwa. Even grandmasters were not immune to feelings of loss and nostalgia. Perhaps they might even be more prone to such. Pengwa household might well rise again in another place, but it would not be the Pengwa house he'd known for so long. Allison looked back at the smoke rising from the city. She recalled reading somewhere about how fires were a great terror in ancient and medieval cities. With building materials available, and no way of delivering water to a fire save by bucket, or even an accidentally started fire could destroy a whole city or most of it. She saw tight faces around her. Everyone knew there was no going back. Everyone knew the city had been lost. Everyone knew that the city that had been their home was lost to them. She didn't have it in herself to say vindictively even to herself, "Now you know how I feel." Ryan had tried hard not to intervene in quarrels among the fugitives, preferring to get the attention of the nearest subordinate and let them handle the dispute. "Awful lot of bickering going on," Ormant commented. "Everyone's upset about having to leave the city, about heading off to who knows where. Ask yourself if you don't feel just a little bit testy. Like maybe you want to try and pick a fight with your grandmaster?" He smiled as he said that, watching Ormant's expression. Ormant managed a smile of his own. Fine sight that would be, the two highest masters rolling around on the ground, punching and kicking like a pair of troublesome youngsters. He sobered then. We're going to have a lot of these sorts of problems too, until everyone gets settled into their new homes. We have to get there first. True. They hadn't bothered stopping at the nearest villages. The people of those villages had frequent contact with the city, if not daily contact, and the doings of the wizards and their conflicts would be common courtesy. Later on, when they came to villages Royan felt would not yet have heard the news, the people he had assigned to the foraging duties went out. Ormant watched the foraging parties come back with laden wagons. "We're not doing too badly." "Yes. Everyone we have like this is a gift. So far, word doesn't seem to have spread to the villages about the fugitive plague-carrying wizards. It will, though. Some wizard or other will send a fire message for the king to the largest cities on our route. Or perhaps the king will send out messenger birds. There isn't much doubt about what our route is. I suppose you, being the Grand Master, have to think about all the problems, not just how smooth the going is right now. Royan glanced at him, wondering just what might be behind that comment. So, do you think you can do it? Sultan grinned. Easy enough to do. Showing the picture on the tent wall is no problem. Trouble is, they'll notice the use of magic, and the Grandmaster might be upset at the unauthorized magical fooling around. I'll explain it to him if he asks. Sultan's grin slipped a little. I don't think you understand, Alison, madame. I'm a baby wizard, just learning the trade. If the Grandmaster decides I'm too reckless to be trusted, well, given our present situation, I doubt he'd expel me, but he'd sure hold back on training me for anything new, and concentrate on training me to be reliable. And magic isn't just something I like doing, it's my life. Alison was about to make some comment about his willingness to take chances, but she stopped herself. She still wasn't of any use here. Did a mere possibility of doing something useful justify pushing someone else into something that might affect their career? Might make them even slightly useless? There's only one possible answer, of course. I'll talk to him to get him to approve it. It wasn't hard to find Royan. The difficulty was getting close to him. Despite the fact he had delegated so much responsibility as possible, there were still problems that only the head person himself could untangle. She got the feeling, talking to the people who were blocking for the Grandmaster, that they had been told to let her see him at any time because no one asked her business. On the other hand, the fellow in charge did say, somewhat apologetically, "You'll have to wait in line, Alison, madame." All right. She did wait, too, watching while Royan dealt with this problem and that. She suddenly realized the man was looking quite worn. After a little longer, she turned away. The man overseeing the lineup said, "It won't be that much longer, Alison, madam." Alison shook her head. "I don't need to see him that badly. Just make sure that he gets some rest." The fellow smiled. Tentatively. "If I can." She wandered back to where Stolastang was waiting. He looked up at her. "Well?" "He's busy taking care of the lot of us. I'll talk to him later. If you can't do anything magical, you can help me with a few more words." The forest had given way to scrub brush, and it was on the edge of where scrub gave way to plain that they came upon the first village that refused to have anything to do with them. It seemed like the whole adult male population of the village, with some women as well, standing in a grim mass along the trail, blocking the path of the Pengwa House fugitives. Clumps of children watching from what seemed to be a safe distance. Arms among the adults were mostly spears and hatchets, with a few plain staves as well. Their leader was a grim-faced bearded man, wearing the plain leather garb of a farmer. "We've had word of your coming, plague wizards! Be gone! You'll not spread your plague among us!" Royan looked at the determined face. "I'll consult with my people," he answered. "Consult all you want. You'll not come through our land." Royan rode back to Ormont and Farrell. "They've heard of us, the plague wizards they call us. We could fight our way through, one way or another, if we wish." Ormont gave him a look. "You say that as though you had something else in mind." "I have. I think we ought to swing aside, go past them and the village." "Let them turn us aside? And what do we do the next time someone blocks the trail, and the next?" Royan shook his head. "If we fight every time someone stands in front of us, we'll wear ourselves out with fighting, and eventually be overwhelmed. We're not soldiers, not trained for that sort of thing. There'll come a day when we'll have to push our way through, but the longer we can put off the day, the better we'll be." Ormont remained silent. Royan could see he didn't like the notion, but he didn't try to argue either. Or he didn't try to argue further. The villagers watched, grimly silent, as the convoy swung off to the left and moved on. The children set up a mix of cheers and jeers. Hajalani finished up his report, which included the information coming from various sources in Rostan. Gagapang was a ghost city. Most reports said that the royal household and some other parts of the city still survived. Most of the population, though, were either dead or fled to the countryside. There was also a rumor that a party of wizards were roaming about Rostan, spreading plague wherever they went. He hadn't bothered to include that bit of foolishness in his report. He considered a recommendation that anyone coming from Rostan be turned back at the border, by force if necessary. No, that would only leave them slipping in through the back trails and so on. Best just have them quarantined until it was certain they showed no sign of the plague. He skimmed over the report once more. It seemed, despite whatever warning Malungtul had been able to bring, the project had been a success. Obviously, the man had warned someone. They'd sent the plague to center on the royal household, but it seemed that the royal household had been almost unaffected. The royal household of Rostan was of little use, however, if its capital, its nation, were destroyed. Hajalani set the report aside. The scribes would take it and copy it neatly, making sufficient copies for all those to whom Hajalani reported. Yes, the project had been a success. If it hadn't been for the presence of the Grand Master, Malungtul felt, the situation would be ludicrous. He was trying to give a lecture on magic to people who, simply because of who he was, would prefer not to listen to him. But Royan made it clear before the session started that they all, including Royan, needed to learn what he could teach, and his lessons should be treated as seriously as if they were being given by any other master. He did not require them to take notes and be able to repeat the salient points of the lecture, but the point seemed to have gotten across. It had not improved the mood of the gathering, but it made it better than a mere futile gesture. Of course, if Royan alone learned anything from it, the lecture would not be wasted. You will see, Malungtul said, pointing at the page projected on the tent wall. The two phrases appear to have the same effect, though the first, can take effect immediately, though the second is to be preferred. For though there is a moment between its pronunciation and the effect is longer lasting. There are still on occasions where the first is preferred. When you're in a hurry to start your plague, muttered an older fellow in the front row. Because of his isolation, Malungtul had not yet heard the names of all the people, even the masters, so he hesitated to say anything. Royan showed no hesitation, though. Kalangas, I believe you owe the teacher an apology. Kalangas sat silent and sullen. Royan spoke once more. Kalangas, Malungtul is giving this lecture at my request. That means it is as if I was myself were teaching. I trust that you see the significance of that? Malungtul muttered. My apologies, master. Though from his tone and expression he may as well have said, Sanat blot you out. Wisely, Malungtul's way of thinking, Royan did not press the matter. Malungtul continued his lecture. Allison finally got to speak to Royan, not because she waited in line, but because he took time to come by and speak to her. He came, not when they were camped or halted for a rest, but rode beside the wagon as it went and spoke to her. She was extremely conscious of the presence of the other passengers, all acting as though they couldn't hear a word. Allison, how are you getting along? She put on a smile. As well as any, and better than many, I think. Sorry I haven't had a chance to talk to you sooner. No apologies necessary. You're the one in charge, the one everyone looks to solve their insoluble problems. He grinned. Sometimes I'd like to hide away and leave it all behind and live alone somewhere. Trouble is, I started this and I can't quit now. He paused. Do you need anything? She stopped. He'd asked, of course, but it was fair to add another petty decision to all the more important things he had on his mind? He smiled again. Come on, Allison. You have something on your mind. What is it? All right, then, she thought to herself. Could you authorize Solitang to do some magical experiments for me? Nothing big. He can handle it easily, he says. But he needs your permission. What spell or what spells? There are some things I prefer not to have anyone fooling around with while we're out here. Just that magnification spell. And a spell to project images onto a tent wall. Maybe one or two others. He thought a bit while his Rakasa continued to walk alongside the wagon. All right, but remember, wizards, even beginning wizards like Solitang, are an important resource for us. Don't wear him out, because I may need to use him with no more than a moment's warning. She thought for a moment. He was going to give her a complete lecture on how important one magician might be, but he left it at that. She was glad he did, since she wasn't sure how much she could trust herself to stay polite if that happened. She wondered if she was ever going to react like a normal person. There were troops formed up, blocking the way to the city of Angarat. Well, Ryan said, it was bound to happen sometime. In the last 3 weeks, we've had some villages sell to us grudgingly, some a little more willingly, and we've had some turn us aside altogether. It was about time we had actual troops out to face us. They don't want us coming near Angarat, Farrell said, speaking the obvious. I wouldn't be surprised if it were worse than that, Ryan said. I'd wager we're about to be required to surrender in the king's name. I wouldn't bet against summary execution either. So, we do all those nasty tricks you've been having us practice? Ormet said, almost eagerly. Ryan sighed. I think I'd best at least talk to them first. I doubt it'll be worth the bother. But if I can avoid fighting royal troops, I'd prefer to. Ormet, you take charge. Make all the preliminary preparations in case we need them. As he rode his Rakasa forward to parley, he wondered momentarily if, sometime when he went forward to parley, leaving Ormet in charge, his second-in-command would instigate something that would leave him, Royan, this spear stuck through him, in Pango House with the new Grand Master. He shook that off. He was the one to make the decisions, so he had to do the parleying, and leaving Farrell, as junior as he was, in charge would put Ormet's nose severely out of joint. Not to mention that there were a lot of newly recruited wizards, superior to Farrell in wizardly ability, who probably wouldn't let his least decision go unchallenged. He smiled grimly. That one fact, Farrell's inexperience, meant that Royan didn't dare stick a dagger into Ormet, even if he could bring himself to cold-blooded murder. He needed someone to take care of Pango household if anything happened to him, and Ormet was the best he had. The officer in charge of the troops was a grizzled old fellow, with a long scar from temple to cheek that added to his grim, ferocious look. So you are the Grand Master of the infamous Pangua household? So that's how it's going to be, is it? Went through Royan's mind. I am Royan, Gradion's child, Grand Master of Pangua household, which has preserved the king and his household. Just to get our side of the story out, for all it matters. The commander snorted in derision. I'm required in the king's name to demand the surrender of yourself and your people. Unfortunately, I'm not permitted to surrender my people into anyone's authority. Not permitted? The commander's voice held incredulity and anger. Not permitted? Just who are you to say that you are not permitted to obey the king's orders? I am the Grand Master of Pangua household. The king has seen fit to accuse my household of causing a disaster, simply because we warned him of it. Because of this, I will not put my people into the hands of the king's servants. Instead, you put yourself into my hands? Seize him! Royan pointed his finger and spoke a word. There was a loud bang and a flash. The soldiers, temporarily blinded, halted. Commander, I'm the Grand Master of one of the chiefly wizardly households of Rossthan. Do you think I put myself in a position where I could be easily seized? I would suggest that if you or any of your men recovers their vision before I return to my people and has the temerity to launch an arrow, consider first what defenses I might have arranged for such things. He rode back to the evacuees. They don't like us? Ormant inquired. On the contrary, they like us so much they want us to be their guests for some indefinite period. They were much displeased when I informed them that we had a prior commitment. Much displeased, repeated Ormant. Yes, I could see that. In fact, they may be going to insist that we accept their invitation. The troops were advancing, with archers at the flanks coming on a little faster to be able to launch their flights of arrows before the main body came into contact. Wizards forward! Royan shouted. Farrell the shields! Borilil! Kill the Deja! Then help us! First, fog and confusion! They hadn't any time to drill in military fashion, nor were wizards in general much amenable to briskly following orders. However, Royan and the rest had practiced sufficiently that they went to work with the little lost time. Suddenly tendrils of mist began to curl from the ground between them and the oncoming archers, tendrils which rapidly became a thick fog bank. Some of the archers seemed to guess what was coming, for they raised their bows, despite the range, then disappeared in the fog. Royan cast 2 minor flashes, one in front of each archer contingent, then continued with the fog and confusion. The flashes wouldn't be quite so effective, with fog blanketing them, but they might help. Several arrows flew out of the fog, launched by guess more than aim, and Royan heard several cries among the household. Killed, wounded, or just startled? No time to check just yet. Then the fog was full and grey, and shouts of alarm came out of it. 2 more arrows came out, shot wildly and nowhere near the evacuees. They'll be in no shape for fighting, even after they get out of there, Royan said. Let's move! As the party began to get under way, more slowly than Royan would have liked, Ormant approached him. They'll follow us, won't they? Actually, the question is, how soon and how close will they be on our track? So along with everything else, we have to arrange a rear guard. Exactly. Anything you can think of to discourage them from following us would be welcome. By pure bad luck, one of the 3 arrows that landed among the household had struck an older servant, who had died before any significant aid could be given him. As for the other arrows, they had hit no one, but they had shocked several. Taken with the one actual death, that shock had been magnified considerably. There was muttering among the people, who now fully understood that they were set against the rest of the country. They won't likely do anything serious just yet, but they've all been brought up to respect the Grand Master and his decisions, Farrell reported. There's just a lot of words, muttering about what they've gotten themselves into, and talking about the likelihood of leaving their bones scattered along the track between here and Nullagang Bay. That's to be expected, I suppose, Royan said. We'll have to think of something to raise the morale. Kalangas broke in. The soldiers are still half a mile behind us, but keeping their distance. Should we do something to discourage them? Royan shook his head. They're far enough back that it'd take a lot of power to do anything. We still don't have the resources to waste. When we camp, we'll set our alarm spells far enough out so that they can't come upon by surprise at night. It was definitely a paramecium. It was shaped like a footprint with cilia around the edges and all the appropriate parts that were labeled in biology textbooks. Solitang had projected onto the tent wall. In the light of a flickering fire, it might have been hard to identify, but Solitang had caged a small magical light from somewhere. What on earth is that? It's a paramecium, Solitang. She'd used the word she knew, since this was the first paramecium anyone in this world had seen, so there's no local word for it. You say this thing lives in water? That's the simplified version, but yes. What does it do? Swims around, eats, reproduces. It has no mind, just instincts. Is it harmful? Not so far as I know. Is it good for anything? How do I explain ecology? Let's just say that it's part of the world as it is. She grinned. It also makes a good demonstration. It does that. You say that everything you look at this way has to be stained? It doesn't have to be, but it shows up better if it is stained. I wish I remember my course and slide preparation better. I'm going to have to do a lot of trial and error. She smiled at him. It's a lot easier having someone around who can say alakazam and change the staining. Alakazam? What is that? I thought you didn't do any magic. It's something from back home. Too complicated to explain. And no, I still don't do any magic. So then, Allison, madam, what good is this business of looking at little tiny things in the water? He always went formal when he questioned, or seemed to be questioning her reasons for doing something. Well, it can have a lot of uses. For instance, one can look at a drop of blood from a sick person and often be able to see the bacteria that's causing it. Unless it's a virus. She continued mostly to herself. I wonder if this spell can be made to function like an electron microscope. But the disease is caused by noxious vapors. She looked at the young wizard and wondered what she might be setting herself up for. He went on. That's the reason they can be so hard to deal with sometimes. The vapor has little in the way of substance, so it's hard to work with. Mostly all we can do is fight the symptoms and hope that attacking the symptoms will carry over and attack on the vapor itself. Even the Saljashanites, who've been working on this for so long, had to use a combination of different spells to be able to annul the 3 plagues they produced. As for the reduction of plagues themselves, I read some of Meluncto's notes, and they're beyond me. If you ask me, I think a lot of what they did was just throw dice and hope for the best. All right, let's not argue with that one just yet. Let's try another approach. This can be used to see the way a plant is put together in extremely fine detail. A lot of what your wizards do is urge plants to change in a certain fashion, and you do it all by feeling. Suppose you could look at a plant before and after you'd made the changes and see what happened to the inside of the plant. Stem, leaves, flowers, and all. You could then have something to visualize to see just what sort of further changes you wanted to make. You might be able to cut out several generations of breeding that way. Solitang looked doubtful. And then suddenly it occurred to Allison that she might be putting herself in the same position as that long ago businessman, trying to get his woodworkers to do something different from the way they've always done it. Alrighty then. So that was chapter 10. So I guess we're getting into good parts right now, and we're gonna see. From this chapter, I'm hoping this means that Allison is going to turn a corner and become more integral to the story. Hoping. Otherwise, yeah, so much editing, but that's neither here nor there. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and I will talk to you again tomorrow night. Thank you. Have a good night.